All right, so what we've set up here are some erosion tables. And these tables are going to show you both how rivers are formed and then how water kind of controls its surroundings. We try to work with water to make sure that we can prevent as much erosion as possible. So in this first table, let's just see how a river is formed. So let's say this is the top of a hill. We're going to plug this in. And slowly you're going to start to see water coming up through this tube. So as the water comes out, you're going to start noticing that a river is starting to form. And if I were just to help, I'm going to help it just a little bit and just for time's sake. But you'll see that it starts to erode away the sides of the river. And that's what you notice when we're on our river trip, is how it starts to erode. You can see that at Durrell's Bridge, where the water has really eroded and has started to create those meanders. Now, what you're going to notice here at the end, which we don't have on our river trip, is that as the water gets down to the breakwater, you're going to see this start to pile out into a delta. It's going to spread the sand out and along the side of this bench or this bucket. And then you're going to see a delta forming. So you have your river right here, and then see how it spreads out like it's got hands. That is how it erodes all the sand from up here gets carried down the river and spreads out at the bottom. We call that a delta. We don't have one in the Kennebunk River because at the end of the Kennebunk River, we created those giant walls. Those walls were to maintain the ship passage there. So as you can see, this is really shallow where all of this sand is coming out, and boats wouldn't be able to pass through here, and it would continue to erode away and make the river wider and wider, and then the sediment would keep going down. So that is sort of how a river gets formed. Now this water, as you can see, if you look right in here, really has some force and digs out the sand. So let's say that we have a princess that lives right here on this hill. If you look at, well, put her over here. If you look right here, you're going to see her house is starting to be compromised, right? Like the sand is going to wash out from under her. She's going to fall down the river, and so is her house. That's going to be a problem. So what we're trying to do is find solutions, and you can see them every day on your way to school, every day on your way to the store. You can see some of the solutions that humans have come up with to solve for erosion. So there's a couple of ways that people use tools to help them with erosion. And we're going to look at a few of those things. So sometimes they will use trees. Okay, we can use trees as wind blocks, or we can use them for their roots. Remember that trees grow really strong, deep roots. So if we were to plant trees in along the side of this river, let's build this back up again a little bit. So if you look at where I've planted these trees, their roots would be able to go really far down into this soil, and that is going to hold this soil in place. This also, farmers a lot of times will plant trees alongside of a field like this as a windbreak. And what that does is, where this would be a flat field for farming, the wind could come whipping through here and just blow away this top layer of soil, and that's not what a farmer wants. Farmer wants to keep the soil in the ground. So a lot of times you'll see farm fields that are surrounded by a square of trees, and that is called a windbreak. So we can use trees to stop erosion. Another way that you might see around places is something that we use rocks for. So if we really wanted to prevent some erosion from coming through in a certain area, we might use rocks on the side of a place. Out on the water, on the coast, we may call that something called riprap. You may see that at people's properties that they have on the water. They'll put a bunch of rocks as sort of not a wall, a straight up and down wall, but they'll reinforce the bank of the waterfront with a bunch of rocks. So we can use rocks as erosion control. We also can use something like this, which this obviously is felt, but if you worked for somebody, an engineering company, they would call this landscaping fabric. And you can use this to keep the roots down, the soil down in, and maybe you'd put on top of that the rocks. There are things called retention ponds. So maybe next to some of the parking lots that you see, you'll see sort of a pond. Or if you live in a neighborhood where they have a little water catchment area, sometimes they'll do that and they'll tip the roads down in so all the water will flow into that retention area and then slowly trickle down into the ground, as opposed to running off really quickly through the roads. Now, we do sometimes have things run through the roads because our roads are hard surfaces. They're called impervious surfaces, meaning that they can't absorb the water that's coming down on them. So if it can't absorb it, it's just going to run off really quickly. So what we have here is a fake culvert. I've made this culvert out of tinfoil, but this tinfoil culvert would be used, as you can see, it's like a pipe, right? So water can run through that. We can use this to divert water. So let's say that I want to make sure all of my water goes through this culvert, and then I could build something over top of that culvert. If you have been on a road, look outside your bus window the next time you're riding to school. You may see these alongside of the road, and then you'll see a road over top of them. You'll see them going under the road. It's where it directs a stream through the culvert so that it doesn't erode around and the road fall down in. So we use these things called culverts to help force the water in a certain direction. So people have figured out how to live with water in many ways. We've figured out how to use plants and trees to keep their roots, keeping the soil in place, or to protect the soil from the wind. We've learned how to use culverts. We've created fabrics that can keep soils in place, called landscaping fabrics. And we can use rocks or other hardscaping, as you would call that, to keep water from eroding the soil away. You guys are going to have a problem that you need to solve. If we have, remember we have our princess over here, and let's say she has a house right here. There's a stream, remember we made that stream that came right through, and it comes right next to her house. Remember when we ran that water through here? It started to cut away at all of this soil. We also have her uncle, Henry. Henry wants to go and visit his niece at her house, and he is over here. But the road, he's got to figure out how to get over this river to his niece's house. So what are you guys going to do? What instruments can you use to make sure that this river doesn't wash away her house? And also, how can we build a road that Henry can get over to see his niece? What instruments are you going to use? Are you going to use trees, landscaping fabric, maybe a culvert or two, rocks? Maybe you're going to use a little bit of everything. See what you guys can figure out to keep this water going in the direction you want it to go. So just like at the end of the river, when we got to the end of the river at the river trip, we had built those long jetties to keep the delta from forming so that we could still have boats going through the water. You guys are going to figure out a human-made way to save her house and to get Uncle Henry over there to visit her. See if you can see what you're going to do.